I remember this person had tears in their eyes and they said, none of the three financial advisors I met with before explained this to me. Hey everyone, I'm Andrew. I'm a CFA charter holder and a CFP professional. I am also the owner of Lever Wealth Management, which is the financial advisor for people who scare financial advisors. And I've spent the last several years helping ultra high net worth and high net worth investors with their complex financial lives. What I do is I take the learnings from those stories and I give them to you so that you can apply them to your own life. And today I want to talk about why everything changes when you have a pension. And many times pensions are misunderstood. As I was thinking about this video, a situation popped into my mind that I think illustrates this well. I had this client who had a union pension once, and typically union pensions are actually pretty darn good. And with that particular union, you could take a lump sum, or you had a plethora of different pension options. And so you could do a single life, which is you get the pension as long as you live. You could do that plus a period certain, which is as long as you live, but it's certain that somebody in your family or who your beneficiary is going to get it for 5 years or 10 years or 20. And then you can do that with a joint life as well. And you can choose COLAs, all these different things. Well, I've typically seen pensions misunderstood in two different ways. The first is financial advisors will look at a pension and they'll say, well, if you live to 80 or 85, the rate of return on this is 5%, and your investments here should do 7 or 8. So therefore, you should roll the pension over into your own IRA, which is probably a little intellectually dishonest, and it masquerades a truth, which is volatility exists. And if you increase the possibility of return, you typically also increase the volatility of outcomes. You've heard me talk about this in other videos. And so if you're shooting for a 7 or 8% rate of return, you may have a year where you're down 20 to 25%. However, this pension is guaranteed. Okay. The second way I see people misunderstand pensions is they will calculate their payout rate divided by the lump sum. So as an example, they'll take the $50,000 a year they get and they'll divide it by the $500,000 or $750,000 lump sum. And they'll say, that's my rate of return. No, it's not. And this is a clear distinction that needs to be made. A pension is just a bond. Okay. But it's a bond with some distinct characteristics. First, it has in nearly all situations, not all, but nearly all situations, a stamp of approval from the United States government through the PBGC, the Pension Benefit Guarantee Corporation, that says, if this corporation can't pay you, we'll make it right. Okay. Almost the same as you'll see with some municipal bonds, they'll be pre-funded, meaning there are assets held in trust that could pay the claims of that bond. There's protection there. Number two, you are getting part of your principal back each year. Pensions at the outset, the anticipated rate of return is linked strongly with a discount rate. I know I'm getting a little complex here, but stick with me. However, over your lifetime, it's an actuarial calculation that says we assume because you're male that you're going to live to 84. And then they essentially give you an even Steven payout that is your corpus or your principal plus some anticipated interest. The way you figure out your true rate of return is you take the lump sum you would have gotten, you take the number of years you get that payment, and then the future value is zero because once you die, it's done. Well, if a pension is just a bond with some added guarantees, you can price it like a bond. The interesting thing is it doesn't have the same risk factors as most corporate bonds. It doesn't have as much interest rate risk because the rate of return is linked to how long you live, not to interest rates. And so you really have to look at it different. And the interesting thing with this client was when you looked at the rate of return out to 85, it was nearly 7% annualized rate of return on their money. So they were getting almost stock-like returns for nearly zero risk. And the pension came in at 65. Social Security came in at 67. Now all of their guaranteed income needs were taken care of. all of them. And so if a pension is just a bond, and if Social Security is really just a bond, then your marketable portfolio of assets that used to need to be, you hear that? That was a tree that came down. Your marketable assets that beforehand you wanted to be 50% stocks, when you add in the value of your pension, you add in the value of Social Security, you may actually be able to be 80% stocks because you're deriving all of your necessary income from this fixed income portion. Okay. That's why I think it's so important to take the time and understand what a pension actually is and what it actually does. And when you truly do understand, it changes the game. The problem with him was he didn't want the pension to go away if he died. But when we looked at a joint life, him and his wife, the rate of return went down to 4%. So instead, what we did is we bought the single life pension on him, but he also bought some 20-year term insurance. He was still under 60 and able to get underwritten at a high health class. The premiums from the insurance coverage were significantly less than the reduction in benefit from the pension. Meaning, if the pension was going to pay him $50,000 a year beforehand, but after it was going to pay him $45,000 for the joint life, so not just on his life, but his life and his wife's, but he could buy insurance for $1,000 a year to insure the pension in case of his death. Why not do that? And that's called pension maximization. Pensions are inherently unique because you are taking the probabilistic outcomes of the many, but your outcome will not be the same. And if you live past your actuarial age, you win and you beat the insurance company. They're called mortality credits. Whereas if you just went and you bought TIPS or treasury bonds and you ladder them out to your age of 85 and you live to 86, you're not getting paid then, right? And so I think pensions being rolled into an IRA, you need to take a really hard look at it and do the math beforehand to understand, is this truly in my benefit? Because they're a dying breed and there are ways to replicate them, but many times the old pensions have better payouts. That's why all these corporations are trying to get rid of them. So my encouragement to you is a couple of things. One, understand your global asset allocation. Pensions and Social Security are just a different type of fixed income with different risk characteristics as well, which is important to understand. Number two, run the actual numbers on your pension. In this example, the rate of return was great, but it may not be in your situation, and you may be better off moving to an IRA, or you're in a non-ERISA pension and you don't want the company to go bankrupt and you lose your benefit. That's fine. Just make an informed decision. And then number three, in your retirement plan, if you don't have a COLA, a cost of living adjustment on your pension, don't put it in your plan. And vice versa. If you do have a cost of living adjustment, make sure it's reflected, because those small input changes have a drastic output difference. So hope this was helpful. Until next time, see y'all.